What's up, y'all? Jared Sandler here with you for another episode of Just Saying, new YouTube series. Hopefully, we'll get the chance to share some of my thoughts with you several times a week. Would really appreciate if you would subscribe to the channel, and also feel free to leave comments, whether it's reaction or questions to what I'm saying, or maybe you have topic ideas for future episodes. We'll certainly heed your advice, your guidance, because at the end of the day, I want to do stuff that you'd like to watch, stuff you'd like to hear about. So please subscribe, leave comments, be active. I got my social media platforms here, at Jared Sandler on Twitter, at Jared Sandler _ on Instagram. You see Sandler J1 on YouTube. So I would love to hear from you, really love to interact. So please feel free to reach out. All right, going to talk a little basketball, a little baseball, a little football today. Let's start with the baseball side of things. You know, Lance Lynn was recently on the Ballsy podcast and discussed a return to regular season play, or I guess a start, really not a return, but a start of the season, and mentioned how he thought the Rangers, with their rotation, were in a favorable position with the abbreviated season. And, you know, honestly, I think it's kind of like saying, and not to disagree with Lance, because in some ways I do agree, but I think that's saying, well, I think, you know, because we have better players, we're in a better position to succeed. I actually think that the deeper rotation would have been more favorable for the Rangers over a longer season, a larger sample size. I think that's when the depth really comes into play, but it's going to be an abbreviated season, and the factors that come with that, fewer games, probably more playoff teams, ultimately is a net positive for the Rangers in terms of their chances in the playoffs. Where I really think the rotation plays an advantage, two things. One minor thing, and that is you can't afford to get off to a bad start. In an 82-game season, it's not a marathon. It's not quite a 400-meter race, but it's somewhere in between. But the Rangers in 2015 won the division, but they started 8-16. That wouldn't work in 2020. That wouldn't work with an 82-game season. And so a deep rotation would certainly perhaps help prevent a cold streak to start the season. But where I really think the Rangers could be at an advantage is in the playoffs. They've got a playoff rotation. Let's just say that one of Minor, Lynn, and Kluber doesn't pan out the way we'd expect, because odds are that's going to be the case, either because of performance or injury. They've got two really good options behind them that could perhaps step up into one of those spots. Now, in all likelihood, it wouldn't be as strong as we'd anticipate, but it still would be a very competitive rotation that could give them a shot in the playoffs. For the first time in a long time, the biggest question surrounding the Rangers isn't their rotation, it's their lineup. All right, on the football side, The Athletic recently came out with an article that detailed a lot of Jason Garrett's miscues early on in his Cowboys tenure. And that leads me to the discussion of loyalty. I'll never forget, to quickly go to baseball, when I was living in Michigan, and shout out to all my friends in Midland, Michigan, dealing with the flooding because of the breaking of the dam. I spent 2 years in Midland, Michigan, working for the Great Lakes Loons. And in that role, I also covered the Tigers. And I remember Prince Fielder said that one of the reasons why he signed with the Tigers, and this is, remember, back when Prince was a stud, was because when he was with the Brewers, he heard a story about Jim Leland going to see Moises Alou after a game in which Moises Alou was on the opposing team but got hit by a pitch and was in the hospital. And Prince talked about the person and the loyalty that Jim Leland demonstrated as a big factor. So a lot of times we discuss loyalty in a positive light. A lot of times we discuss it in a negative light. Maybe a guy's getting playing time out of loyalty that he doesn't deserve, or a coach is sticking around out of loyalty that the performance isn't meriting. And I think you can look at all these instances in a vacuum and assess them, but I think big picture, you've got to consider everything. Is it a net positive or a net negative? Because while Jeff Bannister might have stuck with Sean Tollison a little bit too long in 2016, you can also argue that it was that same loyalty that curried favor in the clubhouse in general. Certainly with Chris Woodward, that's the case. And, I think to some degree, you can see examples of that with all the DFW sports teams. So, yeah, you might lose some battles, but is loyalty winning you the war? And I think a lot of times it does. I think losing some of those battles does allow you to win the war, if that makes sense. But I'm not sure if that's the case with the Cowboys, and I'm not sure if that's the case with Jerry Jones. I think Jerry, there are two things that stand out. Ego, which I don't mean that in a bad way, because we all have an ego. I'm doing this. It's in part because of an ego. I want to be able to reach out to a lot of people. I want to, have my opinions heard, and I want to have those conversations. We all have an ego. I think Jerry's ego, though, has put him in a position to make decisions based on legacy. He knows the Jimmy conversation that, those Super Bowls weren't necessarily Jerry's Super Bowls, and he wants his Tom Landry. And he thought that Jason Garrett was that guy, and that's probably why he hung on to Jason Garrett longer than he should have. And that's going to get you in trouble, along with the loyalty that he felt towards Jason Garrett. I don't know if a lot of Bill Belichick's players would consider him a friend. I don't know if a lot of Bill Belichick's players have a personal relationship with him. But it also allows Bill Belichick to make business decisions. Now, with that said, I think Jerry Jones' connection with players has certainly spread around the league, and it's one reason why players like playing for Jerry. Jerry takes care of his players. But when Jerry's needed to make tough decisions, has he been able to make them? Maybe with players, because there's a financial element with a salary cap, but I don't think he's been able to do it, at least recently, with coaches, because I think Jerry is trying to hit the home run, and he wants credit for hiring the right guy. And I think that's one reason why he's stuck with Jason, even though there are several instances, as beautifully laid out in this article on The Athletic, of how Jason Garrett made some egregious mistakes that an NFL head coach just can't make if you really are serious about winning a Super Bowl or at least making a deep playoff run. So loyalty sometimes can be a good thing. But I do think in the case of the Cowboys, in the case of Jerry Jones, that loyalty along with that ego has really been a disservice. All right, final thing on the basketball court, really on the TV screen. The last thing I want to share as far as The Last Dance is concerned, because I know there's been a lot of Last Dance talk. There are some unanswered questions after the 10-part documentary, which was really good and answered a lot of questions, but not all. These are some of the unanswered questions that are most interesting to me. First of all, would all of those guys even have come back? It started with Phil Jackson. Him not coming back meant Jordan wasn't coming back. Let's say Phil would have come back. Then I think Jordan would have come back. But what about Pippen? Would he really have come back? Would they have been able to make it work? Because the salary cap back then was, I think, like under $30 million a year, or maybe a little bit above. I don't recall. It was not very high. And so there's no guarantee those guys would have come back. Same with Kerr. Would you have been able to get all those guys together? Now, 2 years, in 2 years, I think Jerry Krause would have been able to fill some of those holes. But would he have been able to do it immediately? Would he have been able to replace some of these key role players if they wouldn't have come back with other role players who would have been able to have the same impact? I'm not as concerned about that, but I am concerned about, would Pippen really have come back? Because I think what we've seen is, Pippen felt wronged and felt like he deserves some shine, whether it was in his bank account or maybe just some more credit for his performance. I'm not so sure. I think it's revisionist history to suggest all those guys would have come back. Would they have even won a seventh title, fourth straight? I think that too is kind of revisionist history to suggest it was a done deal. Remember, they faced a Game 7 in the Eastern Conference Finals. They had some close games against the Jazz. Guys were getting older. Pippen's health certainly in question. Now, Jordan didn't play for a couple years, so it's tough to know what level he would have been at had he played right away, and I'll get to that in a second. But I just think that the league was starting to catch up, and frankly, I like that they didn't try for another one, because I don't think they would have won. We don't know. It's a question that's unanswered. But I like that their legacy is so powerful that they ended on top as opposed to floundering in the pursuit of something, kind of similar to an athlete who maybe doesn't hang it up in time. But would they have won a seventh? had MJ played that next year and had Phil not come back, so let's say MJ was going to play but not with the Bulls, where would he have gone? Would he have gone to the Knicks? Would he have gone to the Pacers? Where would he have gone, and how good would he have been? Because Jordan showed signs, some flashes when he came back with the Wizards, but he clearly wasn't the same player. It's tough after 2 years off to be the same player. What would he have been had he played that next year? How good would he have been? Would he have won another scoring title? Would he have been an MVP candidate? I think those are really interesting questions. I think another unanswered question for me is really what truly went down when Jordan retired the first time. Because it just seems so unlike Jordan, the ultimate competitor, at the top of his game, having won 3 straight, to just walk away because he was tired. That just doesn't seem like something that he would have done. I'm not suggesting the gambling conspiracy is the reason why. And maybe it simply was that he was worn down and he needed a break. I guess that's possible. I'd love more clarity. I'd love the total truth on that. I also would want to know more about the Jordan-Pippen relationship. Apparently Scottie, I think Jackie McMullen wrote that Scottie wasn't happy with the way he was portrayed in the documentary. And I think one thing the documentary has shown us is that, I don't know, I think Jordan's teammates respected him. I think they revered him. But I don't know that they loved him or even liked him. And I think it was a very working relationship. I mean, there's several scenes in The Last Dance that show Jordan demonstrating close bonds with security members, support staff. And even after he won that 6th title, there's that cut of him and, wherever, playing the piano surrounded by media members. But were there any teammates there? I don't think so. I just wonder what the true relationship between Jordan and Pippen was like. No doubt that Pippen liked playing with Jordan and appreciates the greatness of Michael Jordan. He's shared that. But does he like Michael Jordan? I'd like to know more about their relationship. I'd also like to know why the heck 5 guys delivered a pizza and were allowed to deliver a pizza to Michael Jordan's room. I guess I wonder how they knew it was Jordan's room or that the pizza was for Michael Jordan. But let's just put that aside. Why would that hotel allow 5 guys to go up to deliver a pizza? And with as much security as Jordan had, I'm surprised they didn't call down and say, hey, we've got a pizza coming from Michael Jordan's room. Please make sure that there's no funny business. It was just odd that was allowed to happen. And then the final thing, why wasn't Michael's ex-wife a part of this? His kids were barely a part of this. As a matter of fact, Carmen Electra was more a part of this than Michael's kids were. I wonder about that. And maybe the ex-wife has just bad blood and didn't want to participate. Maybe Michael didn't want her to participate. But if you want a true look as to what life was like, whether it was for that Last Dance season or Michael Jordan's ascent to that point, wouldn't his kids have been able to offer more insight? And certainly wouldn't his ex-wife, his longtime wife and wife at the time, Juanita Vanoy, been able to offer some insight? I guess I'd like to know why she wasn't a part of this at all. Anyway, that's going to do it for today's conversation. Please, again, comment. Either reach out to me on social media or comment right here. Would love to get your feedback. What are things you'd like for me to talk about? Or maybe response or questions to the things I'm saying. Maybe you think I'm a total knucklehead. That's fine. Let me know. Would also really appreciate if you would subscribe to the channel. We'll be doing this more and more often, and not only things like this, but interviews with central figures in the sports world, be it funny, off-the-wall interviews or serious conversations. That's going to do it for us today. Have a great day.